Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, entertainment, and give you my thoughts. If you join us live, super happy to have you. If at any point you have any questions or comments about anything I'm talking about, feel free to drop it in the live chat. I'll do my best to kind of keep an eye on it, see if we can get a conversation started. If you haven't already, please like this video, like this live stream. It really helps with engagement, the algorithm, and other people finding the channel. So if you have found this channel, you should subscribe. I do this every Tuesday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're watching this after the fact, still super happy to have you. By the time you're watching this, there should be time codes down in the description so you can kind of jump around at your leisure. And same deal as before, if you haven't already, please like this and don't forget to subscribe. This is actually going to be a shorter episode this week. Long story short, I have a bleeding wart on my toe. And I've been out of work all week, and I've just been very disoriented and discombobulated, so I didn't have enough time to get through all these stories. But frankly, the stories 2 through 5 were not going to be that interesting. It was kind of forced. So this actually kind of maybe was a blessing in disguise. So this is going to be a little bit shorter. We're going to do box office, and then we're going to move on to story number 1. But why don't we just jump in? Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past week. Total domestic box office was $127 million, which was only a 26% drop. Notably, this week, because unlike other, publications, I try to look at the weekly box office because I feel like there's most of the money that's being made is happening on the weekends. But there's still a story to be told during the weeks, especially if there's a long weekend. So that we also had this here, right, where this past Monday was President's Day. It was a holiday here in the United States. So that's why you saw some movies that I would have thought would have had bigger drops, did not have as disastrous of a drop, because I'm including those President's Day numbers. If you look at Captain America Brave New World, I would have to confirm this, but I'm pretty sure I heard its weekend box office drop was something like 80% or something crazy. Me factoring in President's Day makes it closer to 40. So, keep all of that in mind. But opening new this week, we have The Monkey. This is Osgood Perkins' next film following up the kind of sleeper hit Longlegs. Open at second place now, a little over $14 million, which unfortunately was below the projections, which was around 17 to 24. So, that's a little disappointing, but again, projections are all relative, right? If we had said the projections were 10 to 20 and it made 14, we would all be really excited, right? This was mostly domestic, made a little bit more worldwide at 16, off of $11 million budget. So again, it would be better if it opened in the green, but at least it's not in the red, as we'll you can see with some other movies at the box office, right? Also opening this week, we have The Unbreakable Boy, just barely squeaking into the top 10 at number 10, bringing in 2.4 million. Again, also falling below projections. I'm curious why that happened for our 2 new movies. This movie is, from what I understand, mid. It's a family drama about a little boy with autism who also has some other, I forget what it is. I think he has very brittle bones or something. It's your very generic, family, kid with disease or illness kind of thing. Oh, so in looking here on Wikipedia, the little boy in question is on the autism spectrum, but he also has brittle bone disease. And it's also starring Zachary Levi as the dad, Scott, to the little boy Austin. But of course, Zachary Levi is kind of in a weird place right now because he's kind of canceled because he's a very vocal Trump supporter and also just not a very good actor. So I don't know. So I'm not surprised this didn't do all that well. And we don't have any budget numbers though, which was interesting. So, but I'm gonna go on a limb and say this opened in the red because there's no way that this movie was made for $2 million, right? So I'm, even though we don't have budgetary numbers right now, I'm gonna go on a limb and say this was probably not a very good opening. And those projections of 3 to 8 million were already very low. And it couldn't even muster that, right? It's closer to 2 million than it is even to that bottom bound of 3 million, right? I mentioned it before, but looking at Captain America, it held its first place spot. Most of the top 10 kind of held its spot. You can see all that yellow on the left, right? This is its second weekend now. It brought in 52 million over the course of the week. So, like I said, only a 40% drop. I'm going to actually confirm live. We're doing some live fact checking here. Captain America, what was this last weekend here? Yeah, Captain America. Okay, so not 84. So the drop, if you just look at the weekends, was closer to 68, which is really bad, right? This was not getting good reviews. Not even just awful, just people just don't give a shit anymore, right? You know, Deadpool and Wolverine, I think Disney was hoping would be like the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, or maybe that's not the best analogy because that's usually like an analogy about things being bad. But I feel like that was an anomaly because it was Deadpool, it was the Fox stuff, it was multiverse, it was Hugh Jackman returning as Wolverine. This Captain America Brave New World is just the MCU slop that we've been getting. Nothing really all that new or exciting. Worldwide, it's up to around 290-ish. So far, off of a $180 million budget. So at least it's in the yellow and it's on its way to being profitable. But I would imagine that looking at the ROIs of like all the MCU movies, even like the past one, it's gonna be kind of in line with like the past 5 years of like a profit, but not particular. I don't think it's not gonna be this huge bomb the way something like Ant-Man and Quantumania was, or the Marvels was. But again, not gonna be doing these huge gangbuster numbers the way Captain America, the last solo Captain America movie did, Captain America: Civil War, which was one of the highest grossing movies of that year, right? Also continuing into its second week, we have Paddington in Peru, the third Paddington movie, and again, fiddling held to its third place spot. Brought in a little, about $12.5 million this week, only a 4% drop, right? So overperformed the rest of the week, right? And again, like I mentioned last week, interestingly, worldwide it's already up to 150 million. So my understanding is that it had already been playing in theaters before being released domestically in the States here. So again, this is a franchise that I feel like Americans obviously like, but it's not like it is a certain kind of cultural touchstone the way for us, I don't know, like Winnie the Pooh might be, right? But I feel like Paddington is a very explicitly British phenomenon, to the point where, again, like when the first movie came out, I didn't even know what Paddington was. And it's just almost at the 100% return, right? It's at 99.45%. So give it one more week and it will be officially a profitable movie. What's really interesting here is Ne Zha 2 holding its fifth place spot. So we mentioned this last week. This was like a sleeper. This is like a Chinese animated action adventure movie. I guess a sequel to the original Ne Zha, I guess. Only had a 14% drop. Only brought in about a little over 6 million. Domestically, it's only made about 15 million. But this thing, I guess, again, kind of like Paddington had already been playing in, I would imagine, Chinese markets. The movie is at $1.8 billion worldwide, dethroning Inside Out 2 as the highest grossing animated movie of all time. That's insane. And I gotta kind of take, I gotta kind of admit, when I was I was very dismissive, being like, oh, this random movie, I guess it made a shit ton, it still had made like a gajillion billion dollars last week. But I was just kind of like, I don't really know what this is all about. But this is like something we should be paying attention to. And now I'm gonna look up really quickly on Letterboxd. Like, let's see, does it have good reviews? Like, do people like it? Yeah, people seem to really like it. It has a 3.9 out of 5. And let me look at the original Ne Zha. It has a 3.5. You can rent it. Okay, it's on Roku for free. Okay, maybe I'll check this out. But yeah, so that's doing very well, which is exciting for the medium of animation, especially, we don't really see a lot of international animation do very well in the United States. And then really from China, we really don't get many movies from China, if any, just because of like this new cultural Cold War that we're in with China. So this is exciting to see that it's, again, not only in the top 10, it's in the top 5. It seems to be getting pretty decent reception from American audiences, right? Looking here, just at a couple movies of note. Dogman still here, holding on its fourth place spot, its fourth week, bringing a little under 12 million. Again, only a 6% drop. So this is holding decently. Looking at the legs, it's not anything to write home about, but it's at least it's profitable. Now it's in the green, which is good. It's brought in a little under 105 million worldwide off of a $40 million budget. So again, nothing crazy, but it is something that DreamWorks can kind of point to as a mild success, right? we still have Mufasa though, right? So Mufasa the Lion King in its 10th week, holding its 7th place spot. This thing just keeps going. 4.5 million this week, only a 17, so still outperformed the whole week, right? When you compare it to that top number of negative 26%, it had a 26. The whole box office had a 26% drop. So this overperformed the rest of the box office. Look at the legs. This thing, like, this has done so well that the colors, like, it's just been on purple forever because I don't have anything above 5, right? Like, we're gonna have to invent new colors. This thing has almost made $700 million worldwide off of a $200 million budget. So again, the ROI isn't insane by any stretch. You know, look at Ne Zha. That's like a 2,000% return. But it just speaks to, you know, again, the counter programming. There's really nothing else that would be competing with it directly here. And it's just like, people just keep making money from it. And again, I've said the fact that the song from it kind of became a meme, I think helped it. And, you know, maybe, you know, kids aren't as in tune to things being cringe. So maybe the kids just really like the, what did you say about my brother? So I don't know. Also still holding out here is One of Them Days, the Keke Palmer SZA, buddy comedy. In its 6th week now, still here in the top 10. It's holding its 8th place spot. Bringing in, so far now, domestically and worldwide, it's only been playing domestically. It's brought in a little under 46 million, off of a $14 million budget. So, again, I say this all the time, you know, the ROI here is almost identical to Mufasa. So it's like, maybe we would all just be better off if instead of making one $200 million movie, you know, Hollywood made 10, $20 million movies or whatever. And if you could try to, you know, arrive at a similar ROI, well, then you end up with more movies, though. And more diversity of movies. Because there's a reason why these movies are called tent poles. Because, you know, when you have a tent pole, if you knock out a tent pole, the whole tent falls down. So these huge movies kind of prop up the studio. So, you know, from a business perspective, it just feels very short-sighted just to make these super, super expensive movies rather than just making a bunch of cheaper movies. Because then you diversify the risk. And then coming up this weekend, we have Last Breath. This is based off of a true story, I believe. And interestingly, I believe the director of this actually directed a documentary about this. So this is based off of the 2019 documentary film. And here's what Wikipedia says. It relates the story of a serious saturation diving accident in 2012 when diver Chris Lemons had his umbilical cable severed and became trapped around 100 meters under the sea without heat or light and with only the small amount of breathing gas in his backup tank. That's horrifying. So I guess now they're making it into like an actual movie with Woody Harrelson here. Again, not really projected to make all that much money. Projected around 3 to 10. I'm going to put my target around 6.3. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay, let's talk about story number 1. Hey, if you're just joining us, this is going to be a shorter episode this week. So we're just going to do this one story this week. So let's talk about story number 1 here. So Amazon MGM Studios, of course, the film branch of Amazon, right? They have finally secured complete creative control over the James Bond franchise. Now that I'm saying it out loud, I don't know if that applies to the entire media franchise or just the movies, but I think the whole franchise. I got a quote here from Barbara Broccoli, and yes, that is her last name, of the Broccoli family, who is the main producer of the franchise up to this point, saying, quote, "My life has been dedicated to maintaining and building upon the extraordinary legacy that was handed to Michael and me," Michael's her stepbrother, "Michael and me by our father, producer Cubby Broccoli," and that is his name. I think Cubby was a nickname. I think his real name is Albert. We have had the honor of working closely with 4 of the tremendously talented actors who have played 007 and thousands of wonderful artists within the industry. With the conclusion of No Time to Die, which is the last Bond movie from, I think, 4 years ago, that and Michael retiring from the films, I feel it's time to focus on my other projects, end quote. So the way this is going to work is that the Broccoli family, who has controlled the franchise, the film franchise for decades, but now I think it was like the 2010s, they secured the rights to the entire IP. They will still co-own the intellectual property, but at this point now, Amazon will be calling the shots. They're going to be the one in the driver's seat, right? Amazon also put out a statement saying, quote, "We are honored to continue the treasured heritage and look forward to ushering in the next phase of the legendary 007 for audiences around the world," end quote. So, James Bond, one of the more iconic characters of English language media. Interestingly, because it's not this larger interconnected franchise with lots of characters, it really is just built around this one dude. And a lot of people don't know this. He's actually started as a literary character in a series of novels created by Ian Fleming, the author Ian Fleming, in the 1950s. The first book being Casino Royale in 1953, which of course got adapted into the first Daniel Craig film in like 2006, right? He's meant to be a Secret Service officer of MI6, Military Intelligence Section 6, right? So kind of like their version of like the CIA kind of. And of course his code number is 007. And again, people just think about the movies, but it's a multimedia franchise with the novels, the films. I mean, there have been video games. Famously, the GoldenEye video game from the 90s for the Nintendo 64 is very iconic within the video game sphere. So it's not as limited as a lot of people, I think, right? And if you don't like copyright, or like how complicated copyright is, then you're not going to like this, right? So the rights surrounding James Bond is like a very strange web of rights holders, right? So of course the original book, in the book series started in the 50s. In the 60s, it may have been in the late 50s, but in any case, producers Harry Saltzman and Albert R. Broccoli bought the film rights, which then became the first James Bond film, Dr. No, in 1962 with Sean Connery, right? And that jump-started the film franchise. They created a holding company called Danjaq, Danjaq. I guess it was like a combination of each of their wives' names, like Dana and Jacqueline, just pushed them together, Danjaq, right? They created this holding company to retain the rights to the film franchise, right? In 1975, though, Saltzman sold his half of the company, or his stake in the company, to United Artists, right? Cubby Broccoli still controlled the company, but United Artists had a financial stake in the company now. But then things get complicated, because then in 1981, MGM, the historic film studio Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, buys United Artists in the early 80s. But again, at this point, Danjaq still controls the films. And like I had mentioned earlier, this holding company eventually acquired the rights to not just the films, but the books, like basically anything James Bond 007 branded. So that's kind of where it laid for a while. And then just a couple of years ago, MGM merged with Amazon Studios to create Amazon MGM Studios in 2023. And I say merge, but really that was an acquisition by Amazon. And one of the big reasons they wanted MGM was for James Bond, right? That was probably their most lucrative asset. Even though MGM didn't quite control the asset, it still had its hands in the pot, right? So a lot of people are reacting to this, and I think the big question is, what does this mean, right? Like, what is this going to mean for the James Bond franchise? And full disclosure, I'm not really a huge James Bond fan. The only one I've ever seen is the Casino Royale Daniel Craig movie from 2006, because my college roommate, one of my very good friends, Harvey, was British, and he loved James Bond, so he had us watch it, and I was kind of unimpressed. And that's supposedly supposed to be like the good one. Or one of the really, really good ones. It just never quite appealed to me. But it is a very storied franchise, and a lot of people really care about this character. Going off of more than a half century now at this point. And it was interesting because James Bond, like if you were to ask ChatGPT, like list the 50 most iconic film series, right? James Bond would probably be one of them, right? But interestingly, that would probably be the only one on the list that was not fully controlled by a major corporation, right? Not that every film franchise started a major corporation, but at this point in the 2020s, the 20s, if you will, the roaring 20s, or more like the snoring 20s, right? this is one that, like, it wasn't Disney, it wasn't Universal, it was essentially this family, the Broccoli family. Once Cubby passed it on to Barbara and his stepson Michael, and they really began in earnest with the mid-90s GoldenEye, and they have been producing it ever since. And reportedly, the Hollywood Reporter notes that Barbara Broccoli described Amazon executives, this was back in the maybe a couple years ago, as quote unquote fucking idiots. Like they were suggesting to have all these spin-offs and stuff, and she just was like, I guess it really irked her when they described James Bond as content and kind of like devaluing it as just like this thing, the way that like a commercial is content, and it really rubbed her the wrong way. Film Speak critic Griffin Schill, responding to the news of this kind of, not hostile takeover, but Amazon now kind of gaining full control over this character. Griffin here said, quote, "This is quite possibly the worst thing to happen to this franchise. It will be milked dry," end quote. And again, that's kind of my concern as well. That's what these big corporations do, because they don't really care about the legacy of this. Because again, these executives are very short-sighted, just by nature of their position, because they're not going to live forever. But especially today, like, media executives don't like they shuffle around a lot. Like, they don't spend a lot of time at one company. So oftentimes they are more concerned with the short-term profits and stock price increase, because like their compensation is directly tied to that. So they don't really care if it's going to dilute the brand, whereas like it was a big deal when a new James Bond movie was released, or even more so when a new actor was cast as James Bond. Like that it's always been like a really big deal. And so it seems like people are concerned that, Amazon's gonna kind of do to James Bond what Disney did to Star Wars, where they just oversaturated it with mediocre content. Because Star Wars had always been oversaturated, but the content was at least interesting or different, or sometimes actually really, really good. Whereas modern Disney kind of just feels like, like you occasionally get something kind of interesting, but it all kind of feels very samey, right? And again, are they going to try to follow through with the ideas they had suggested to Barbara Broccoli? Do they want to have some kind of connected universe? Because again, except for some of the Daniel Craig movies, which a lot of people didn't like about those movies, unlike those, the movies are typically standalone. Like, even if they feature the same actor, like, you could just watch any James Bond movie, and you don't necessarily need to know what happened in the last one. Whereas with some of the Daniel Craig movies, they tried to make it a little more serialized, and kind of like more sequels to each other. And interesting, we got a quote here from Joe Russo, one half of the Russo brothers, of course, from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, doing Captain America Winter Soldier and Civil War and Infinity War and Endgame. He put out a quote, a tweet or whatever it was, saying, in response to this, saying, quote, "Don't," in all caps, "don't Cinematic Universe James Bond. It is one of our last great theatrical events. Don't dilute that with a plethora of streaming spin-offs," end quote. So that kind of seems almost like a little jab at his former and now returning employer, because now the Russo brothers are doing Avengers 5, Avengers Doomsday, right? And there is this concern, not just hypothetical, but Amazon, we've seen what Amazon has done with like legacy properties. So they don't own necessarily all the rights to everything, I believe, but famously Amazon got the rights to make Middle Earth content like Lord of the Rings, and they did that show, The Rings of Power, which got middling critical reaction. Like, everyone was kind of like, at best it was good, and at worst it was right? So it's not like Amazon necessarily has this amazing track record with taking this legacy content and not just doing like the cynical, low-hanging fruit version of it. And again, Bezos, interestingly, Jeff Bezos, like, once this was announced, posted on X, he asked his followers who they would want to see cast as James Bond. Which again, I mean, on one hand, like, okay, it's cool you're democratizing this process perhaps, but what it betrays, I think, is a sense of, like, again, these corporations have no creative vision. And the Hollywood Reporter notes that back when Daniel Craig was cast, it was met with a lot of backlash, because he was more of like a very different kind of look for James Bond, notably because he was blonde. James Blonde was like the big headline. Like, every newspaper, that was the headline when it was announced, James Blonde, question mark. But the Broccoli family saw something in him and took a creative swing. And it begs the question, would Amazon be so bold? Because, you know, again, I'm not really, but people who like James Bond have all agreed that Daniel Craig ended up being a really fantastic James Bond. So it's people are pretty bearish on Amazon, you know, actually having a vision, rather than just casting like whoever focus tests the best with audiences. But this raises the interesting question, right? Who would be or could be the new Bond? A couple names that were being thrown out in the trades and doing my research, you know, people like Tom Hardy could be good. Idris Elba has always been a fan favorite idea, though people were like, you can't do that, he's black, James Bond's supposed to be black. And Barbara Broccoli even once said like she would be fine with race bending the character, though she notably said she wouldn't want to gender swap the character. Kind of saying the same thing I've always said, where she's like, and I'm gonna kind of paraphrase what she said and kind of put my spin on it, of like, it's kind of almost insulting, where it's like the only big iconic characters for women can they only just be the sloppy seconds, like a character that has traditionally been a man. Like, we can't create new interesting iconic characters for women to play. And so that was kind of where Barbara Broccoli was coming from. Like women could do better than doing Jane Bond, right? And she also said, you know, like, it would kind of rob, like, the character is about masculinity, or like idealized masculinity. At least in her words. I don't know if she means like literally this is how men should be, but I think her point is that like it kind of encapsulates what we think of as masculinity. So to make James Bond a woman would kind of like rob the character of like this essential piece. Something that race bending would not do, right? You can make him black and he's still a man, right? But the big one that seems a bunch of people really want is Henry Cavill, right? Of course, was our Superman for a time in the DCEU, in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, all of that. And interestingly, he originally auditioned back in the 2000s for Casino Royale, but lost out to Daniel Craig, notably, mostly just because he was too young at that point, right? So a lot of people are kind of like, and I think his audition tape has been released online, and people are like, shit, like, he was really good. It's a shame they couldn't, you know, it just didn't work out in that time. You know, at this point, it's like 20 years ago. So is he now too old? I don't know. But a lot of people seem to be pointing to him as like maybe he could be someone, especially now that his schedule's freed up after leaving The Witcher and leaving Superman, right? So he could be a good choice, I guess, for that. Again, I really have no skin in the game because I really have no affinity for this character. Viviana here writes in the live chat, I heard that Daniel Craig said he would rather eat glass than be Bond again. Don't remember why, but even he is against the ultra franchising, end quote. Yeah, and that'd be something I would have to look up, is how many, I wonder if I look up like list of actors who have played James Bond. Oh, it's not coming up. Shit! Because I wonder if there's like a breakdown of like how many people have played. Oh, here we go. Portrayal of James Bond in film. I wonder, is there like a tally of like who had the most? Oh, it doesn't say. That's unfortunate. I would imagine. So I think Sean Connery has the most because he was in like 6 or 7 of these movies. But again, like, by making it serialized the way they did with the Daniel Craig movies, again, it kind of did make it like this ongoing story, which was never the intention. Like, it was almost kind of always like it is James Bond. It was always kind of like Sherlock Holmes, in that, like, again, you could kind of just jump into any story, and you're not really following like a specific continuity. I wonder when Daniel Craig said that, because it's interesting because I think he said that, like, and then he made another one. So, I think he's been in 5. Right? Because he was in Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, Spectre, and then No Time to Die. So I think it was after Spectre, he probably said, like, I'd rather eat glass. That was 2015. And then I think then they made No Time to Die in 2021, because they probably were like, we'll give you like a gajillion dollars. He was like, all right, fine, I'll do it. So yeah, I wonder how he feels about it. I think he's probably just like, I would rather just go do something else. More interesting and different, right? Because the guy's been doing it for 15 years now. So I think he's ready to. I mean, we already knew he was not coming back, but now we really know, like, okay, this is a new direction for the franchise, and it'll be interesting to see where Amazon takes it. But just because it'll be interesting doesn't mean it will be good. Okay, so that wraps up the show. Like I said, I'm doing a shorter show this week because I'm having some medical issues this week. I didn't have enough time to prepare all the stories, but also the stories I was going to do weren't all that interesting, right? And I didn't want to half-ass it, right? So I just want to give a quick plug to Cineman Q. So it's not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where we publish written reviews for new movies coming out. We have a new segment on the newsletter called Jacob's Gaze, where my good friend Jacob Boblet posts his own reviews as well as just other musings about media in the film industry. And he posted a really touching obituary for David Lynch in response to his passing. So definitely go check that out. You can find the link in the description below. You can just go to your browser, type in cinemanqso.substack.com. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't yet, please like this live stream. It really, really helps with engagement, the algorithm, so other people can find the channel. And speaking of which, if you have found the channel, why not subscribe? We're trying to grow this community, so maybe perhaps one day I can quit my full-time job and devote all my time and energy to this show. Until next time, peace out.